Good evening, folks. Good evening. Good evening, folks. Hello. Yeah, I don't have a gavel. There you go. It's 6:30. We're gonna. Yeah, I know. It's 6:30. We're going to get started in a minute or two because I just got a message from one of our board members, and I want to make sure they get here before we start. I'll ask you to make these quiet. That's always appreciated. So if you could turn your ringtone down, I don't care if it vibrates, but if it rings, sometimes it's a little disruptive for us who have attention issues. So give us a minute or two and we'll get started. And thank you all for coming. And if you want to talk in public comment tonight, there are these public participation cards. They're by the front door there on that little table. Thank you for pointing to them. Fill it out. Make sure I can read your name. And I'll do my best to read it properly. So thank you. And again, we'll start in a minute. This next board member gets here. Okay. All right, folks. If we could all settle down, we'll call to order the Champaign County Board Environment and Land Use Committee. The time is 6:38, and we're still letting some people float in. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Rogers, Varney,
Present.
Owen,
Here.
Rodriguez, Storr,
Present.
Esri,
Here.
Thorsland.
Here. We have a quorum. We have one member on the way. It might actually be a parking problem tonight, trying to get in. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda with addendum.
So moved.
Moved by JJ, second by Don. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. We have the minutes from the August 8th, 2024 regular meeting before us. I'd entertain a motion first to approve. Moved by Aaron, and a second by JJ. Is there any additions, corrections, addendums that anyone cares? Stretch this out because we're waiting for our board member to come. Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Okay, the next part of the meeting is public participation. I have a lot of slips here tonight, and I'll do this anytime we have a big crowd. We have a time limit of 1 hour. We have a limit of 5 minutes per person. This board is a very considerate and deliberate board. They like to discuss. They like to take time to work on what we're working on tonight. And I want to make sure they get their time. So we will probably not extend public comment beyond the hour. So if you can be concise, you don't need to use the 5 minutes. It's not a requirement. If you're in support or in disagreement with something that someone before you said, you can just say simply that you support and get your point across. We try not to be too redundant. At least that's your responsibility. We're terribly redundant up here, but we do our best. And I want to give everyone who signed a slip, and if there's anyone who still hasn't, they're by the front door, a chance to talk tonight. So be considerate of everyone, and turn off your phone ringers if you can, because that's terribly distracting. So to start, I call Andrew Rhea. Reen? That's an N. All right, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm ready.
It's okay, so's mine. The floor is yours, sir. Push the little button, make sure the red light comes on.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight and for hearing this important issue, putting it on your agenda, and supporting it. Thanks for the opportunity also to speak to you at that August meeting to share kind of what this problem is and why we need to address it. And I will try not to use too much time because I want to give that time to others since you have heard from me. But we're here today to protect the Mahomet Aquifer. The Mahomet Aquifer is the sole source aquifer for almost 1 million people in central Illinois. Sole source is a US EPA designation that means that the aquifer does not have a reasonable economic viable alternative if it is contaminated. And today we want to protect that like we have stepped up to protect it in the past. Today's issue is carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration is a technology sometimes touted as the solution to climate change, but really it's posing many threats, and including to our drinking water. Carbon stored under the aquifer could leak through a number of different pathways, and if it gets into the aquifer, it can contaminate it both by acidifying it, but also releasing pollutants. Pollution in the aquifer is hard to clean up, as we know, from the Peoples Gas issue. And the Mahomet Aquifer is, it's not worth the risk. We cannot risk our sole source drinking water aquifer to private profit, certainly not. And we know that these projects do leak. The ADM facility in Decatur, we learned over the last month, has leaked twice. They knew when they were negotiating the bill that was passed last May, and they knew when they were negotiating with the city of Decatur. And they didn't tell anybody that they had leaks in their project. What they're proposing, what is being proposed to be stored under the aquifer is 50 times what is stored at that project at ADM. So the scope of what we're talking about is so much greater. And that's just what's proposed today. Thankfully, no projects are currently proposed under Champaign County, so this ban will hopefully not face any opposition, but we want to make sure that going forward, this is protected, that we don't have to come here when there is some counterparty who wants to store CO2 under our aquifer in Champaign County. And ultimately, we need to do this statewide. We need legislation, or we need 14 counties to step up and say, it's not happening under our aquifer in our county. I did want to give a chance for, obviously there's a lot of people here. I wanted to give a chance for everybody to show their support. So please raise your hand or raise your sign if you are in support of protecting the Mahomet Aquifer.
Support. And for each one of us, there are probably 100 more.
So there's a lot of support in the room. It's good to hear it. Thank you all for coming out. I'll give the rest of my time to other folks. So thank you so much for considering this at your meeting.
Thank you. I now call Mayor Diane Marlin from Urbana.
Thank you. My name is Diane Marlin, Mayor of the City of Urbana. As Mayor of the City of Urbana and a member of the state's Mahomet Aquifer Protection Task Force, I support a moratorium on carbon sequestration in and under the Mahomet Aquifer. This is the first step toward a ban on Mahomet Aquifer carbon sequestration, and it's the latest in a series of actions taken to protect the aquifer over the past 10 years. We can't say it often enough. The Mahomet Aquifer serves as the primary source of drinking water for over 100 communities and thousands of rural residents in a 15-county area in central Illinois. It's also essential for many agricultural, business, and industrial uses. The Mahomet Aquifer has been designated in Illinois as a sole source aquifer. This means there is no reasonable available drinking water alternative if the aquifer becomes contaminated or compromised. And that's the most important thing anyone will say tonight. Past actions have included local governments banded together and blocked a proposal to landfill PCBs and manufactured gas plant waste in the, over the aquifer in Clinton, Illinois. They also petitioned the US EPA to get the designation as a sole source aquifer. The Mahomet Aquifer Advocacy Alliance was formed. The Illinois General Assembly formed the Mahomet Aquifer Protection Task Force in 2017. This task force was charged with developing a state plan to maintain the quality of the aquifer's water, to identify current and potential threats to the aquifer, identify steps for long-term protection, and make legislative recommendations to protect the aquifer. And this task force, the leadership, the late Senator Scott Bennett, Representative Carol Ammons, Senator Chapin Rose, all were leaders in this effort. In 2018, we published a report from the task force with 10 recommendations for action. The top priority of that report was funding Prairie Research Institute at the University of Illinois to use helicopter-based technology to map the aquifer. And what we have started to do is create a very detailed, three-dimensional underground map of the aquifer, similar to an MRI. And this has really changed a lot of people's thinking about what the aquifer does and how it functions. And we need to do that across the entire aquifer. Champaign County First Coalition adopted this mapping as a priority project. We go to Washington, D.C. and Springfield every year to lobby for funding for mapping for the aquifer. We were successful in part in getting Senator Dick Durbin to allocate $1 million in congressionally directed spending. We used to call those earmarks, but basically it was earmarks to fund mapping of the aquifer in Iroquois, Vermilion, and Ford County. The Champaign County Board allocated $500,000 in ARPA funding for HTM mapping in Champaign County. That mapping is completed, and I want to thank County Board members Chris Storr and Stephanie Furtado and others for their leadership in that effort. The Boone County Board has allocated funding for mapping of the aquifer. And recently, Representative Carol Ammons, Senator Paul Faraci have introduced legislation to ban carbon sequestration through and under the Mahomet Aquifer, not just in Champaign County, but the entire aquifer, and that is what it should be. Senator Chapin Rose has also been an active and staunch defender of the aquifer. So for me, the path forward is just as clear as the water we drink. We must protect the quality and quantity of water in our sole source aquifer. It is life itself for Central Illinois. There's no other way to put it. I support the moratorium on carbon sequestration projects through and under the Mahomet Aquifer, and ultimately a ban on such projects in the entire aquifer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Shibu Asani.
I press this button. Oh, okay. Hi, y'all. My name is Chibu Asonye, and I'm a resident of Urbana, and I was resident of Champaign, so Champaign County. I wanted to take a moment and talk to you about Oxford, Mississippi. Mississippi, as some of you may know, doesn't have the best water infrastructure, and there is active disinvestment in ensuring that the public has access to safe and clean drinking water. While I was there in graduate school for 2 years, I experienced for the first time several water boils. And I believe that this would be the future of Champaign should we not ban carbon sequestration, but more so if we should not protect the Mahomet Aquifer, which others have said is the single source for our community across the board. And so in Flint, Michigan, in Jackson, Mississippi, and in Chicago, there are water boils, which means that any tap water, including those in refrigerators, will need to be boiled for a particular amount of time. And even if that happens, there still may be contaminants that, that you'll have to deal with, which is unfair. So you have to potentially, yes, which is ultimately unfair and can be cost effective, it can be expensive. Not everyone is able to boil all this water, and it costs money since a lot of boiling will be from electricity and not always gas. And so water boils are going to come out more likely than not if we don't protect the Mahomet Aquifer, and that is a experience that I don't want my fellow country people to have, particularly since there's other states like Flint in Michigan and in Jackson, which are currently dealing with these things, and we don't want to follow in these bad footsteps. Thank you.
Thank you. Vijay Shah.
All right, well, first of all, thank you very much for giving the community voice on this issue. I know that in other places where projects like this are considered, the community isn't given the time and space, so I want to say I appreciate that very much. My name is Vijay. I'm a graduate student in the chemical engineering department, and I work on carbon capture. So one of the things I want to say is that the kind of carbon capture technology that's being proposed here isn't the only way to do this. We need to do carbon capture in order to reach a climate-smart future, but injecting CO2 gas underground is not the most effective solution. There are ways you can form the CO2 into solids and put it underground. You can turn it into carbon that looks kind of like coal, you know, that you would put in your grill. You can do something like that and bury that underground. That doesn't have nearly the same risks. But that technology isn't invested in because it's known that developing it is going to be more expensive. So under the logic of the market that develops these technologies and makes them commercial, no one really wants to invest in that unless there's a significant subsidy. So the cheapest alternative is to do what you've seen and heard from folks before me. So at this point, I don't really feel like I can rely on good faith in terms of this kind of technology. And the EPA's guidelines about these kinds of geologic storage acknowledge that CO2, when it comes in contact with water, becomes corrosive in the form of carbonic acid, right? And so you've heard that, again, from people before me who are even more knowledgeable about this. So what I want to say is that carbon capture projects like this aren't really in the public interest. because they're not really looking at all around what makes a technology most safe and effective. So I want to quote professor from the University of Michigan. His name's Kyle Powys-White. He's a Potawatomi professor. And he said, quote, "The last person you want hitting the panic button in a bad situation is the one who caused the problem in the first place." And he's referring to the Western logic that has created all the CO2 pollution that now we're trying to fix. And so what I want to add to his comment is, Western civilization has created this CO2 problem in a tiny fraction of human history. And so because of the short-sightedness of the technology that we've put out into the world. So the question that I want to ask is, what makes us think that the solutions that we are rushing into, frankly, are not going to have even worse consequences? So even with the protections that the EPA provides, and even they say, it says protecting drinking water resources, they still acknowledge that those risks are there. And the only way to deal with those risks adequately is to find a new, different technology that does not pose the same risks. Otherwise, we're just slapping Band-Aids on a solution that is at some point destined to fail. So all that being said, you've heard from many experts already that we have no alternative water source in Champaign County. Illinois, the state of Illinois, has already made clean water a priority all these years. And so I don't see a reason why we should risk it now. And we have a special gift on Earth with fresh water, right? Most of the water, the vast majority of the water on the planet, isn't directly potable. We have that here. And so we cannot take that for granted. There is no amount of money that would be worth sacrificing the one thing that human life needs to survive, which is our water. So that being said, thank you for your time, and I wholeheartedly support the moratorium and a permanent ban on carbon sequestration under the Mahomet Aquifer. I yield my time.
Thank you. Joe Hooker.
Thank you for having a public hearing on this, and I appreciate the opportunity to have a few brief comments. First, a little background that I think is relevant to the concerns I have. I'm a retired assistant city attorney for the city of Champaign, and in that capacity, I did all the legal work for the two coalitions, intergovernmental coalitions, that one proposed and successfully proposed the sole source aquifer designation by the US EPA, and secondly, that successfully acquired a settlement against area-wide disposal to prevent them from further putting PCP waste on top of the landfill in Clinton. And one of the striking things about that whole journey, and we started putting the coalition together back in, I think, 2012, and then spent a number of years building it with more and more local communities. One of the things that was very significant about that is we weren't getting protected by the regulators who were supposed to be protecting us. The US EPA was poised and ready to approve the application to make this a regional, for something like 7 states, dumping ground for PCP in the Clinton landfill over the Mahomet Aquifer. And I remember there were credentialed experts on both sides. The area-wide credentialed person, of course, thought that no problem, this will never be a problem. And the Mahomet Aquifer Water Authorities hired their own equally credentialed expert who said, this is a terrible idea. There's all kinds we don't know that much about the aquifer. What we do know is there's lots of imperfections in it. And the consultant for the PCP, for the Clinton landfill, is absolutely wrong about that. So that's the other problematic thing about this. You have impressively credentialed people who diametrically disagree about what the technology can do, what the environment is, and that's the nature of the game. And also, we've only touched the beginning of examining this aquifer in a really comprehensive way with what HTEM, which was referred to earlier. And so far, I think $1.5 million have been allocated to it. The original recommendation in the task force report is we would probably need something like 17 million to do the whole aquifer. And the General Assembly, frankly, hasn't had the inclination or the money to do it, largely. Now, that's starting to change, but, you know, and so between having regulators, and I don't know that it might be entirely because they're short-staffed, they don't have enough time or manpower to actually make sure the private actors are actually doing what they're going to saying they're going to do, which reminds me of the situation with People's Gas, the leak in the Mahomet Aquifer that I'm sure you're all familiar with. This is a heavily regulated, supposedly heavily regulated utility that basically let their pipelines through the aquifer deteriorate over several decades and stopped looking at it. And there's still a civil suit pending, and they actually have pictures of the pipes, the big gaping holes in the pipes that resulted from years and years of rust on the pipes. And the people who were contaminated are still not able to use their drinking water, as I understand it. They're still using bottled water all these years afterwards. So given that setting, I wholeheartedly support the idea of a moratorium by our county and ultimately a ban to protect the aquifer in our county. I think that's crucial. I think it's, as other people have said, it's way too risky to put this into place. It's not a really tried and true technology to begin with. It's a relatively new technology. And then you add that to the limitations of our regulators to actually effectively monitor this. I think it's a terrible idea, and I would hope that you would support the moratorium and also a ban ultimately. Thank you.
Now call Tom Yu.
Good evening. My name is Tom Yu. I am the city attorney for the city of Champaign. I'm here on behalf of the mayor, Mayor Finan, who's not available tonight. I want to echo the comments made by Joe Hooker and others today. The city of Champaign has been involved in these efforts to protect the aquifer since at least 2012 when Joe Hooker was involved, and in the efforts to build up the coalitions to protect the aquifer. I can't think of anything more important to the city residents than protecting its water source. And so I am here to echo the comments made today. The city itself doesn't have the legal ability to restrict activity of this nature, but the county does. And so we're here to express our support and ask you to finalize the moratorium. Thank you.
I want to point out that the person who gets paid by the minute just had the shortest speech of the night. So. Allison Harper.
Hi, my name is Allison Harper. I am not here today intentionally in support of the aquifer, but I am in support of protecting our aquifer. I care about our water supply just as much as I care about what food I consume. Last month I showed up and actually there was no meeting, and so this is quite a big contrast to that. But last meeting, I was not very prepared to speak. And I was distracted by a phone call, which really threw me off. After the meeting, I learned that it was a call to inform me that a young hawk had swept in and killed one of my birds. That's just one of the downsides of having animals out in the country, away from my home. When the big derecho came through, it flipped our duck house entirely over. It's made of steel welded together. you know, it held on. We didn't really lose anybody, but, you know, we weren't there to watch our animals. Most importantly, I can't just look out my window and check on my ducks and my chickens and my pigs. I can't bring kitchen scraps to them unless I get in my car and drive across town, which feels very inefficient to the environment, personally. And out in the country, there's no water unless you dig a well. There's no power unless you get it installed. The grid power out there tends to be higher than in town. And that's all, of course, if you're lucky enough to find it. I don't know if any of you have actually looked for land around here recently. It's really hard to find, and it goes for about $20,000 to $25,000 an acre. Bare bones acre. So I really strongly urge you to reconsider stringent regulations on livestock in Champaign County. Limiting a household to only 6 chickens, as many of you may know on the board, would produce only about 4 eggs a day. Chickens lay, on average, about 4 or 5 a week. So 4 on a good day, great. It's enough for breakfast for 2 people. But what if there's more than 2 people in a household? Or one of us wants a 3rd or a 4th egg, which I often do. What about making your own pasta or mayonnaise? Or if I want to make a quiche, I guess I better save up for a week. But let's be honest, if I'm going to make quiche, I really would prefer duck eggs. Seems like a silly tangent here, but duck eggs are way creamier than chicken eggs and much richer in flavor. You know how a hard-boiled egg, the yolk kind of gets a little grainy? That doesn't happen with duck. So when you bake it, you get very creamy food. Made delicious cream or cottage cheesecake, and more recently, pumpkin pie of pumpkins that we grew. So what about ducks? Why only chickens? What about rabbits or quail? Why are we limiting it to only animals, mind you, no roosters, so they can't reproduce on their own? What about turkeys? I love my turkeys. They are delightful. We have 2 that we've kept alive since last year, and 2 that we did have last year. I encourage everyone to raise their own Thanksgiving turkey. It's phenomenal. Before I started this journey, I ate like many Americans. I would cook from time to time, but often preparing food meant for following the 3 steps on the back of a box or microwaving something out of the freezer. More often than I'd care to admit, my food that I ate came from a drive-thru. Eggs would often go expired in my fridge before I ever used them. But now my passion for baking is invigorated. Food excites me again. I have energy, apparently. My body produces body warmth. I didn't know that. It's changed my life for the better. Can I just ask for just 30 seconds extra?
Yeah, we do have a lot of people tonight, so
Okay.
if you could wrap up
I'll wrap
as
it
quick
up.
as you can.
I'll text next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, you can finish. Just
In the last meeting, the 3 comparable counties in Illinois were discussed. And to clarify, Peoria and Sangamon County both have 0 restrictions, whereas McLean County has a stipulation of 150 feet from others' property. 150 feet is technically feasible with as little as 2 acres, not necessarily the 10 stated or assumed in the past meeting. So I want to know, if I were to purchase my own land, how many acres do I need? How many thousands of dollars do I need to come up with to purchase land? Thank you.
thank you. I now call Anna Nesbitt. Well, there's an advantage when it falls on the top of the pile, yes.
So I looked at the technology that's being used to pump carbon dioxide into sites underneath the Mahomet Aquifer. My name is Dr. Anna Nesbitt, and 20 years ago I worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory on supercritical carbon dioxide and methods for carbon sequestration in the DOE. So this project is actually DOE related originally. Supercritical carbon dioxide is carbon dioxide that's pressurized and kept at above the critical temperature. And this is the state that it's pumped into the ground. And in this condition, it is very much like a gas. It moves like a gas, but it has the viscosity of a liquid, and it makes it a super solvent. And so anything that is in that CO2 can kind of be activated. So just the slightest amount of water in the CO2 can make it very corrosive. And it also can start extracting things from, like sandstone it comes into. Well, sandstone, that if it comes into contact, if it has oil material, which sometimes it does, it's dirty, that's how we do like fracking, right? You break up shales. So it can extract impurities out of those materials and take it with it to the site. So it makes it a little bit kind of dangerous in the sense that there could be many more impurities that are being driven into the sites or picked up on the gas's way into the injection site. By the time it's in the site, it won't be in the supercritical state anymore because it has to be maintained at above a temperature of around, I think it's injected in at 95 degrees Fahrenheit, I read. So I don't think that's possible, but so the other important detail is the material is only 99% pure. And so it wasn't clear to me what the other impurities that ADM is injecting into the material. So that should be really like heavily examined before, you know, you make your decision, I think. But I don't have those details. So that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Ted Hartke.
Good evening. My name's Ted Harkey. I live northeast of Sydney. Can everybody hear me okay? This CO2 sequestration thing is a complicated deal. I want to start out by saying that the smallest minority is the individual. Okay? All of us are individually important. All of us deserve clean air, clean water. I want to start out with that. The reason why we're getting this topic pushed upon us to deal with is because of a strong push to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere. If we weren't crazy about thinking that CO2 was causing climate change, we wouldn't have this conversation at all. We wouldn't be trying to pump it into the ground. If we didn't have this problem, we'd let it release into the air and let it do its natural thing, which is becoming plant food. So trees and crops can grow and we can feed the population on Earth, whether it's humans or animals. The thing about this CO2 is, and keep this in mind, it's not been totally settled upon that this is our cause of our problems, because there are a lot of scientists that think it's the global warming. Climate change is a cyclical thing that the Earth is just going through, just like the ice ages before we were creating human industrial CO2 in the air, okay? Keep that all in mind while I say these next things. The primary users of CO2 sequestration are large industries. And a very big industry is the ethanol industry. A lot of environmentalists are much against ethanol because of how much water that ethanol demands to be used to pump it in the ground. If you start pushing against ethanol, you're going to go up against farmers and producers of corn, because those folks use ethanol as a means for a higher demand for their crop, okay? So that's how we got to this position where we are worried about our aquifer because of the demand of the environmentalists that want to reduce our CO2. And then the government comes in with lobbyists, and they figured out a way to pump it into the ground. And reminds me of a speech a little while ago where they said that the solution is worse than the problem, right? So if our aquifer is not a good place to pump the CO2 into the earth, there's probably not very many other places on earth that we would be putting CO2 into the ground. If it's a problem in an aquifer, it's a good chance it's a problem elsewhere. So I'm not saying that we should not make our aquifer our number one concern, which it is tonight, but we need to think about this in a broader aspect. In the big picture, perhaps CO2 is not the enemy, it's our solutions to these problems that we've over-exaggerated, okay? So, I'm going to summarize my thoughts here. Number one, we should never, ever be punching holes into our aquifer for any purpose whatsoever, whether it's gas storage or CO2 sequestration. Our aquifers are lifeblood. We cannot risk it, okay? I think that for now we could let the CO2 become our plant food for trees and crops instead of creating poisonous water supplies. I want to support the moratorium and create permanent ban on CO2 pipelines and sequestration. So let's also ban the pipelines, as the rupture for those things could cause serious harm to us folks that are on top of the ground and trying to breathe the air. I would never want a CO2 pipeline near my home or my family or my friends and even anyone here in the county. Okay? I definitely have been very outspoken against other issues here in the county for zoning and whatnot. And my summary about that is nobody should be harmed because a neighbor wants to make money and have a financial benefit. This goes for loud roosters next door and wind turbines and solar panels that you don't want to ruin a people's view shed from their home that they worked hard to have a beautiful country setting. This CO2 sequestration is the same thing, but it's on a bigger scale and it affects many more people than just a few wind turbines. Thank you for your time tonight and good luck. And don't put any carbon underneath our aquifer, please. Thank you.
Elizabeth Kirby.
I'm Elizabeth Kirby. I live in Champaign, Illinois for the last 40-some years. The last time I've been at your board meetings and spoken one time, and that was about 2013 when the issue of selling the effluent from the sanitary district to the fertilizer factory in Tuscola. And we had probably 3 times, it seemed like 3 times as many people. Every single one of those people said, don't do it. You know, our water is important. We don't know the ecological consequences, but they're unlikely to be good. One person may have spoken for it. They totally disregarded everything we said and sold the effluent anyway. And it's my understanding that the contract has just recently been activated. Is that true? Do you know? Okay, so anyway, I'm concerned about the carbon sequestration, but more than that, I'm concerned about the aquifer. I mean, I think a lot of things, but that got me thinking about it, and I went and I talked to the head of the sanitary district. And while I was there, I said, why are our taxes going up for this? And he said, because every one of these buildings, these high rises, is taking as much water as an entire neighborhood. And I've been thinking about that ever since, you know. I think about it now when our effluents go into Cronus. I think about it when I hear about an ethanol plant expanding in Gibson City. One other thing that I happened one day as a volunteer to man the soil and water booth. You know, if they had the rainfall simulator that shows what happens, it shows the erosion, it shows the, you know, the soil going. And I sat there for 2 hours explaining this, and then I looked underneath, and in only the place that had full coverage, like a wetland would or a grassy, that was the only place that was sending water down into the catch basins down below, and all the other treatment conditions. So I'm thinking about our aquifer, and I'm looking at all this building, all the increased uses, all the decreased places that, for recharge. And I've been trying to find out about, it's very hard to get information about what's really going on in the aquifer. Although I hear there's mapping now, and, but, you know, my concern here is death by 1,000 cuts, you know, and this could be one of them. So, no, I don't want carbon sequestration by the aquifer, but I really want, I feel as county board members, protecting our aquifer is the most important thing you can do. So, thank you.
I now call Harold Diamond.
So I'm Harold Diamond. I've lived in Champaign County for 57 years. I hope to continue living here until I stop living. And I, along with most of the other people here, value the water in our community as one of the really very important resources that we have, and something which is very deserving of being protected. And people have spoken in quite a bit of depth and detail about scientific concerns, about protecting the aquifer and what possible issues there are if the aquifer is subject to the carbon sequestration and things go wrong with it. That'll be a very bad event for the entire community. Now, the companies that are engaged in this project want us to believe that everything is going to be fine. And however, if things go wrong, they have very little liability connected with the whole thing. And I'm proposing that if this genuinely bad idea should be allowed to go forward, that they be required to do what is in the American tradition, that they should do something free enterprise calls for. That is to take out a liability bond with an insurance company. They should find one that is willing to commit itself to unlimited liability to protect the aquifer and to make whole again all of the communities that are affected by any damage which the sequestration causes. And well, if that were in the slightest way possible, we might have a tiny bit more confidence in the whole enterprise. But I strongly doubt that any company would be so bird-brained as to go ahead with giving a bond of something with an unlimited liability. And I say that we as society should be even more hesitant to agree to doing such a thing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Well, I want to express the appreciation of the whole board, especially myself. Everyone was very kind with their time, to the point where we actually have a little time. Is there anyone else who wants to speak tonight about this? We've got maybe 10 minutes more. Fill out a slip. If not, fantastic and wonderful, and I thank you all for being very concise and very precise and very passionate about what you're here for. I'd love it if you stay. We have some other things on the agenda too, but it's not a bulky agenda tonight, and it would be really wonderful if you could all stay while we deliberate that. We may even have questions for some people that spoke tonight, so thank you very much. Seeing none who want to go, moving on to communications. Is there any communications for the board? Is that a one little teeny little finger? No. Dr. Storr, usually you have something.
I think the electronics collection is this weekend, and
We appreciate you reading ahead, sir. We'll give people a moment to slide out. But yeah, if there's no other communications, new business, item 7. John, if you want to fill us in on anything that may be left open in the electronics recycling event that is coming up on Saturday.
Right, it's at Parkland. Probably all slots are full, but people do cancel, and when they cancel and we can reach someone who had put in a hold, we can squeeze them in at the last minute. So anybody who hasn't had a chance to register, I encourage you to not be afraid to register. And if we don't work you in on Saturday, we'll have another event next May. And just keep in touch between now and then.
All right, thank you, John. Any questions for John about electronics recycling? Seeing none, let's move along to new business items for information only. We just did that. New business to be approved by ELOC. A is the recreation and entertainment license for the Gordyville USA LLC, doing business as Corner Concessions under new ownership at 2205 County Road 3000 North in Gifford, Illinois.
I move approval.
Okay, we got a move by JJ, a second by Aaron. Any discussion on this? This is Gordyville, and we all know it. Under new ownership. Any questions for John about the application? Everyone has signed off on it. So, seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? All right, that's approved. Are you going to get that door, Aaron? Okay, item B, authorization for a public hearing on a proposed zoning ordinance text amendment to establish a safety moratorium on carbon sequestration activity in Champaign. First, I need a motion. Moved by Don, and second by Dr. Storr. Discussion. We'll open it up to the floor. I promised these people we'd be deliberative and precise and concise, and don't let us down. So I'm going to start with Dr. Storr, because I think his hand was, if not, ready to go.
Thank you, Chair Thorsland. I was one of the ones that brought this before the board a couple of months ago, and it the Safe Carbon Capture and Storage Act kind of slipped past me. Wasn't paying attention to that particular bit of legislature, and it didn't show up in my search for stuff as I usually do. And like any sort of activity, it is probably more appropriate in some areas and some places than it is in others. And we take pains to not cite any new landfills in areas where we see a threat to to groundwater. Unfortunately, we have 218 of those legacy landfill sites over Muhammad Aquifer, and about 40% of them are within 20 feet of a mapped shallow aquifer. So we're already seeing the problems with being expedient and trying to be cheap in how we dispose of our solid waste. I have to admit, in my schooling, I never expected to see carbon dioxide labeled as a waste. And, but here we are. And I agree with most of the people who spoke that that it is, would be risky to inject the carbon dioxide beneath the sole source aquifer. There are other locations outside the aquifer where such activity might be conducted safely, if it can be. And I agree with some of the public speakers that this is a matter of concern and deserves more time for thoughtful gathering of information, looking at experiences in Illinois and around the world. And this is going to be a rather awesome undertaking for Champaign County Board. And I think that the moratorium as proposed is warranted, and I urge my fellow board members to look on this favorably.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Anyone else? Emily?
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to begin with two slight asides and then right to the main point. First, I just want to acknowledge Ms. Harper, who has been at our meetings, I think, consistently for the past 5. I always see her, and I always find her comments informative, especially for somebody who resides in a apartment building. So, and I represent District 8, not a lot of farmland, so I always learn quite a bit from what she says. The next thing I want to note that I think Vijay, he's a grad student, he commented tonight. I do want to thank both mayors for participating in a full and robust participation period. I think that's great. I do think that it is something, I want to commend the chair for extending public comment. I think that doing so befits a public-facing body. Finally, I just want to echo the comments that have gone before, say absolutely not our aquifer. If we can do anything in the county board, it is to protect our water supply. And that's something that I full-heartedly am happy to do.
Don?
Yeah, I want to echo some of Emily's comments. I really appreciate the public participation. And having been involved as a supporter, not necessarily a participant, over the years in supporting the Muhammad Aquifer, and especially the sole source designation several years ago, I'm not at all surprised to see the depth of knowledge that comes from a town like Urbana-Champaign. It's always refreshing to know that we have people that live here that know way more than most people about things like carbon sequestration and protecting a sole source aquifer. I also have more of a procedural technical question that, John, you might be able to answer. So I'm fully supporting the moratorium. I'm concerned where it's looking like a temporary moratorium, but I just want to make sure that it's clear. The moratorium is so that we can set these hearings in place so that we can make a more permanent decision. Is that correct? I just want to make sure that that was clear to everyone, that that's what we're doing. It's not just a 365-day moratorium. it's a moratorium while we get these hearings in place so that we can make a formal decision, a more permanent decision on how to protect the aquifer.
Right, and in fact, even the moratorium has to go through the public hearing at the Zoning Board of Appeals. And once we're finished with that, then we'll have more time to spend on developing the final amendment. So it's going to be a long road.
Okay. But during that long road, we're putting things in place to protect the aquifer.
All right, John?
First off, I echo everybody else's comments, fully in support of this. I mean, where else am I going to get my water to mix with my bourbon after our meetings? Okay, and if you're on the county board, you understand that. I do have to comment, though, one of the handouts that was sent to board members is from Representative Ammons. And here we are on the county board fixing problems that Springfield created. And I remember back in May, the photo ops, and Chapin Rose yelling and screaming, what about our aquifer? And Chapin Rose being telling, you're just being Chapin Rose. Yet here we are, fixing a problem that Springfield created. Thank you.
Chris? Aaron, it's your turn.
I have no problem putting a moratorium in place. I personally don't get my water directly from the Muhammad Aquifer. I don't believe it's under my house even. I get my water from a well that's down into a pocket of water that is good. It's plenty for me right where I'm at. It's never had an issue. I'm fortunate in that respect. I know there are places in this county you can drill a well and it can be hard to find water. Why wouldn't you? Why would anybody not want to protect underground drinking water? Not that, I mean, the drinking part of it is obviously the big part of it. Granted, it gets used for other things, but the drinking is the biggest part of it. And why wouldn't anybody want to protect it? I mean, so yeah, I'm in favor of it. Yeah, isn't going to be just a short, simple process, but it's something that needs to be done.
Thanks, Aaron. Chris?
Thank you. To reference a previous statement about passage of the Safe Carbon Sequestration Act, our local legislators told me that they worked very hard and to get the Muhammad Aquifer, or get sole source aquifers exempted from the bill that was passed and signed this past summer. They were disappointed that those pleas were not that did not make the final passage. However, there were other considerations in the bill overall that I'm told that environmental groups, watchdog groups, that including some that I respect very much, said that there was a lot of protections and that they thought the bill provided those, and they were not upset that the bill was signed, but they did recognize, as we are hearing this evening and as we are working on, and as Representative Ammons and Faraci have told me personally, that they want to see this, the Champaign County enact this procedure for a moratorium, and to provide time for additional study. And I would point out that they have all, both Rose and Faraci are working together on trying to get a bill passed, or get a bill through the legislature, and Ammons on the House side So, yes, there is criticism, but it wasn't for want of trying. And I just think that ought to be mentioned and considered along with the previous statement.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Anyone else want to double down on anything? No? All right, I guess it's my turn. Yeah, Chris started to talk about this, I think, 3 or 4 months ago. We had some discussion. As chair, I asked staff to get this on the agenda, I think 2 months ago, so that we could talk about it tonight. I think it's important. I think there's a couple things that are important that we should discuss. I think it's not a question anymore that we have to be careful about the climate. I mean, I think there's a whole bunch of people in the Tampa, Florida area that would agree tonight if they could see this meeting, but they don't have any electricity and they're busy mucking out basements and first floors. And people in North Carolina, people in Georgia are all struggling right now with effects of things that they never thought they'd be affected by. Imagine being 2,000-foot elevation and having your house wiped out by a flood. It's not something that anyone ever expected, but I've done a lot of reading about carbon capture sequestration to the point where I can almost say it 3 times in a row without stumbling on sequestration, which is why we call it CCS. I've been reading a lot about water problems, and as some of the members of the audience said tonight, it's fundamental to life. We are very lucky and fortunate where we are to have the water that we do. This is certainly not the case around the world, and not even in the county or in Illinois, but we are very fortunate that we have this aquifer beneath us and the people to the west. I had a conversation with my equivalent in McLean County. They actually have companies that are actively trying to start up injection wells in McLean, and they are trying to do the same thing we're doing here. They encourage us to do what we're doing. They're working on getting all the counties over the aquifer, not just McLean, but all the counties, to do something similar to what we're doing tonight. I appreciate that the mayors of both towns came. I appreciate everyone that spoke tonight a lot. And Allison, I appreciate what you said too. I understand. And just as a brief aside to you, I appreciate you coming to these meetings. We could talk about it afterwards. I had to give up, and for 20 years lived in rural Newcomb Township with propane and a well and a whole bunch of chickens and ducks and pigs and things. And at some point, you have to decide who's going to commute. You or the chickens, and sometimes you just have to go live with the chickens, which is, you know, a terribly expensive proposition. But I really appreciate you coming in. I think that we did what we could with that. And back to the water, like the food, very important. I don't doubt that we need to do something about carbon. I think that one of the people that didn't stay that I would have actually wanted to have come back up so we could ask some questions was Dr. Nesbitt, who is, I have to go to Los Alamos National Lab in about a month, who seems to have a pretty good knowledge. We also have VJ, who I think is still here, who has some good knowledge on that. And I encourage you folks to come to the public hearings at the Zoning Board of Appeals, where there isn't a time limit on public input. And I'm not throwing them under the bus and making their meetings long, but as a former chair of the ZBA, those meetings are long. But there's a reason for that. We want to hear from everybody. I think you can tell by the way the board has spoken tonight that this was not something that you should have been very concerned that we weren't going to pass. I want to make you aware of the timeline that John has so thoughtfully put into the agenda. The way this works is we're going to vote on recommending a public hearing at the Zoning Board of Appeals. And there's a timeline to these things. And this is the best case timeline for this temporary moratorium. and the Zoning Board of Appeals and the board. The public hearing would be Thursday, the 12th of December, which I know is far from here, but it has to be advertised. And do you know what that is? That is our 1 hour for public input. So I guess I have to be quiet now. And then Thursday, January 16th, the public hearing would close. And that's if they get all the public input and they have time to deliberate and vote. And then we'd be back here in February on the 6th for the ELOC meeting, Environment Land Use meeting, where we would recommend this to the full county board. Actually, yeah, we would normally hold this for 30 days here, but I think when we have a consensus of the whole board, we don't hold it for 30 days. And because it would take time, we would just pass it on. And then Thursday, February 20th would be the soonest date it will be before the full county board, where I encourage you not only to go to the ZBA, but to come back to ELOC. Because you were so good tonight, we'll let you do it all over again. And then go to the county board, which has the same rules for public input. So unless there's any more comment from Chris, JJ, go ahead.
I have a question about the timeline. Is there a reason we're not putting this in the November 14th ZBA meeting? Or is it already full?
It's already full.
Okay, thanks.
There's your answer. Chris?
I just wanted to thank John Hall for his expeditious draft putting together of all of this. I neglected to give you credit. Putting together the timeline, all of this stuff is, and the, you did an awful lot in a short period of time. Thank you.
I appreciate that. The state's attorney was a great help, though, of course, also.
All right, well then, unless there's more input from people, let's read the item one more time so we remember what we're voting on. Authorization for a public hearing on a proposed zoning ordinance text amendment to establish a safety moratorium on carbon sequestration activity in Champaign County. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? All right, and that unanimously goes to the ZBA. And also, thank you, John and staff, for putting that together. Now, if folks are really excited to stay, we're going to talk about solid waste hauler licenses and the monthly reports. So if not, if you could move out quietly, and we'll finish up the rest of our meeting. And again, thank you all for coming. I'll give you a moment or two to get to the hallway. All right, thank you again, folks. Thank you again, board members. All right, other business, discussion of the solid waste hauler license fees. I think a lot of us were in the budget meetings, and we heard about this, and we just talked about the residential electronic collection event, and this is what pays for that. And I think we visited this about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, where we raised it to what it is now. 5 years ago? Good Lord, I'm old. Time flies. Was I on the zoning board back then? Holy crap. Anyway, so it seems like it's time to do it again. There's been some discussion that I've heard. There was some suggestions in the budget hearing to incrementally do this. There's been other suggestions that we can't wait for incremental because, John, maybe you want to fill us in on the balance of our funds to hold things like household hazardous and electronic waste?
Well, I think current budget projections are that next year we won't have enough from the solid waste license fees to pay for all of the recycling events. So next year, we'll be in the red, which is to say we'll have to draw from the rest of the budget to pay for those things. Now, it is only $10,000 altogether, but next year, we'll be digging into the rest of the budget to get that 10,000.
And our current rate, I think, is 40 now?
35.
35
per license.
Per license. Are we comparable, do you know, with other counties? Are we extraordinarily low?
I briefly looked back at the information Susan put together in 2019, and even after raising it in 2019, we are that $35 is very comparable to what other counties were charging then. Now, Travis Woodcock is planning for us to, contact those counties again, see what they're currently charging, maybe even check with some other counties. Frankly, comparing counties is one of the most difficult things you can try to do. Every county is pretty much completely different, but we'll do the best we can to get a comparable.
There was some timeline issues with this too, as we put the budget together, that maybe they would like us to come to some conclusion to this. It's not an action item tonight, but are we thinking maybe next month we could make it an action item? Is that just impossible? Do you want suggestions from us? Do we want to hear from the executive? Because I know the executive has an opinion on this. Steve, do you have a moment to share?
I guess coming into this meeting, my concerns were that some members of the board may be willing to go with an incremental rate in instituting the increase. And that, as John pointed out, that's just not going to work out. We already know our budget's going to be tight next year, assuming that we have no additional revenue. And I don't know that another month's delay is going to make any real difference, but I would say to move forward with it as expeditiously as possible would be the best course of action.
And what would be the ideal rate to keep that fund full? Because these are very popular events and always pretty much subscribe to the maximum.
The information I had at the budget session that I was at was we would have to increase from $35 per sticker to $145. And, some of the companies get more than a dozen stickers. We don't really have that many 1 and 2 sticker companies left in the area. I would recalculate that, but I'm confident we're looking at more than $100 total.
Yeah, and that's, if you look at it on paper, that's a huge increase. Do we have a rough idea how many trucks total get stickers every year?
It's around 100.
Around 100, so that would be a huge increase. But do we know, what's interesting to me is what increment of what they make in waste hauling fees they charge customers, how much is the sticker part of that? I think their biggest bill is probably personnel and fuel. Have we gotten, since we talked about this in the budget hearing, I'm sure all the waste haulers were tuned in to the budget hearing and listening to us discuss this, probably not a single one. I doubt they're tuned in tonight, but have we heard from anybody who has heard about it that we're aware of?
No, we haven't heard from anybody, and of course, we would notify them all before we bring anything to the committee.
Yeah. So I think I said in the budget hearing that I would be more interested in seeing this increment up because to, basically quadruple it from where it is now seems like an extraordinary change from one year to the next. And I hate to do that to people. I think we try to avoid this with, the rabies tag fees and with, pet registration and with all the other things we do at the county. We've tried to be very considerate of the end user because the end user in the end is going to pay for it. That's why they're called end users. So I don't know how I feel about suggesting that we go right to, 140. But, perhaps making it 70, which is a 100% increase of what we have now the first year, and then increment up in steps to try to get to this target in a couple of years. And I'm not sure how the whole board would feel, but I think these electronic and household waste recycling events are popular enough that there's probably, because it's not a huge bill, some wiggle room to convince the board to do a budget amendment and move a little bit over to keep that fund moving forward while we kind of adjust this. Steve's probably over there going, "Shut up, Eric. Stop talking like that." Yeah, I'd have a hard time just jumping it to $140 from 35. Hey, Chris?
I understand your reasoning, and I'm sympathetic. $35 per truck is ridiculously small, and while I hate to see us see such a large jump, I would say at a minimum we should do 55 per, this year, and 55, plan for 55 next year, on top of the 35, and to reach the 145. But I would not object to sending them the bill, and I remember talking with one of my minerals economist friends, who very respected researcher about solid waste, and he just shook his head and said, we pay a pittance of the actual cost for waste disposal, the real cost of waste disposal, and solid waste handling. This is a small amount. I agreed that it is a big jump, but it is $145 for a license is not unreasonable. I have nothing more to say. I'll just keep muttering.
Anyone else? JJ?
This may actually be something more for Travis. So Steve, if you hear this, do we have anywhere like a list of all of the fees that we collect? Everything from notary and birth certificates through, whatever it is, the fees that we actually collect. I'm just curious how, say, a $145 fee kind of fits into the mix there. Okay, that's just another thing that I had thought of. And I know John is working on finding out how many trucks, the actual number of trucks, and what companies have however many and things like that. Steve's shaking his head.
This is in a different area, but we have not raised our liquor license fees in Champaign County in 16 years.
That needs to change, obviously.
Well, I have looked at that, and we'll be moving forward at some point in time, yeah.
Okay, so I think we need to be looking at all those things. Just knowing, this is me talking from finance vice chair hat on. We've got to be looking at all of these things right now because it is going to be extremely tight for the next year and for the foreseeable future. I also, just sitting here doing math in my head, my waste hauling service is a large corporate entity, and our rates went up, and on my account alone, it would cover the full $110 increase this year. That's just me. Well, they've got how many thousands of customers in this county? Makes me think if there's only 100 trucks countywide, they've got maybe, a third of them or half of them. that's a drop in the bucket. I think Chris is probably on the right track on that. But I think we've got to, from a finance standpoint, we need to be looking at it. And I don't know that there's money to shift around to continue these events.
Yeah, thanks. I have no problem with asking for an increase. I mean, just period. What increase is going to be? I mean, costs of everything have gone up. Not necessarily. I mean, has the cost, John, gone up, or are they staying fairly flat right now to the county and the other entities for the events?
Last year, the cost of the residential electronic recycling went from 13 to 15,000.
Yeah.
The household hazardous waste has been very constant. We don't have that many costs related to that one.
But so that was a jump of $2,000 for
4,000 for the year.
Yeah, 2,000 per event. Yeah, 4,000 for the year. So that right there shows that that's going up. So we need to somehow, again, they're very popular. They keep the electronics and household hazardous waste. The idea is to keep them out of the landfills and just being dumped in the countryside and everything. Unfortunately, I do see this as potentially another way for the solid waste haulers to, we need another rate increase. I mean, granted, I agree with you and JJ and Chris that it's basically a drop in the bucket, but yet I can see them, we had an increase, so we need to increase it to our end user, despite it, very likely that they could eat it, you could say, or just pass, not pass it on. But so some kind of an increase I have no problem with. Ultimately, I guess I wouldn't have a problem with going straight to the 145, but I don't necessarily care if we get there in this incremental way either, if we finally get there to where it makes it sustainable, and hopefully that would be sustainable to where we aren't in 5 years. Hopefully it'd be sustainable for maybe at least 10 years out, although we can't project future costs either. But if we could try and make it to where we think it might be good for maybe 10 years, but I know that's probably far out, but I don't have a problem with getting to where we a rate to where it is sustainable for at least what we can see and project for maybe 5 years at least. I mean, ideally it'd be maybe for a little bit longer than that, but again, we don't know what's coming down in the future. So, but again, I wouldn't have necessarily a problem going straight to the 145 in the big scheme of things.
Yeah. Don?
It's on. Yeah, I just echo what Aaron said. I mean, I don't think that that's an unreasonable jump for the companies that we're talking about. So.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I'm not thinking that we're going to go and tell them that it's 140 and three of them are going to go out of business tomorrow. The question I have for Steve, if he knows the answer to this, is we haven't raised the liquor license fee in 16 years, but do we have more liquor licenses out there than 16 years ago?
That information I don't have. I can check with the clerk's office. There's more institutional knowledge there with their staff than I think I would be able to come up with.
Yeah, because I know we get a monthly report from the clerk's office that gives us sort of totals on fees collected for all the different things that they do. I don't know that we get that from every department. But my guess is we don't have more waste haulers in the county than we had 16 years ago. We probably have fewer. I mean, I know we have fewer because some of the ones that I used to use when I lived in the country don't exist anymore. In the end, they will raise our rates. I could personally fund their sticker charge in 2 months of my garbage collection, the change, because that's about, the 55 is about what I pay every 2 months. So, and yeah, well, I have a Illini, and it's not an advertisement for Illini Recycling. I've just had them forever, and they do a good job, and they bring me a nice shiny red bin. And, you know, I know in my neighborhood, it would probably be really fractional, you know, just on what the Thursday, Friday morning customers are. Just in my neighborhood, probably wouldn't notice it. But I know for sure that at some point we'd see it reflected. So maybe we just need to do it and get it all the way up there and then not have to, like you said, do it again in a few years. Steve?
I've been eagerly typing away trying to get information on garbage hauling fees, which I should have done earlier. City of Champaign charges $100 per vehicle, just as a comparison.
So that's another question. If they're hauling in the city and they're hauling in the county, are they having to get 2 stickers? One for each? I imagine they have to get one for everywhere they go, right? I mean, I'm in the city, so it may explain why my bill's what it is. Chris?
I pay $70 a year for my geology license. I don't think it's unreasonable for a truck to have something nearly double that. And I'd like to see this considered at least every 2 years, so that we don't kind of run into the circumstance that Steve is talking about, where we have, or what Mr. Hall said, you know, that we haven't looked at this for 5 years. I think that's too long. I'd like to see this considered, some of these licenses considered every couple of years. I mean, the resident, you know, I think that it's important to support household hazardous waste and residential residential electronic recycling. And if everybody has to contribute 50 cents or something along that line to their waste hauler, I don't see that as a terrible imposition. I don't know where you could buy a cup of coffee for 50 cents.
Know where you want to drink it. So, and maybe they did this when they came up with the amount they have, but what would be interesting is to take what we've seen, the yearly incremental increase in the electronic and the household hazardous waste events and how they go up, and then if we make it the 145, are we going to stay with this curve for the next 5 years? Or are we going to immediately fall off of it again and have to, you know, we do this at the county. And everything else kind of does that. You know, maybe it's not enough. But it sounds like if it's $100 in the city and we're charging 35, we're kind of a bargain. And I know they're spending more money to do collection in the rural area because they're driving further. I mean, the house-to-house part of the driving is not anything compared to, I believe they all go to Danville at a minimum to, yeah. And so, you know, to empty the truck is the long ride.
Didn't Hoopston landfill close?
Think of all the people that left the meeting and missed all this fascinating part of the meeting. So this is government in action.
There was somebody out in the audience that is a professional surveyor and engineer and might know the answer to that question. I think it's closed. Hoopston?
Yeah, just for the record, the audience member says they think Hoopston is closed, Liz. So what would the board like to do? Do we want to go right up there? Do we want to go to 100 and then do the 55 next year and actually be above our target? But then it doesn't seem so bad. I mean, if we can give people direction, then maybe we can get this done. Done?
I would support anything that gets us there in 2 years, but my personal inclination would be move it all the way up this year.
For which one? The 2 or do it now? Do it now, do it now, do it now, just do it. So is that a simpler approach? Is it something easier to put together and we can just get it done? There's no projections here, there's no doing any math, surveys are out the door. Let's just do it.
We'll have that on the agenda next month.
And I expect some waste haulers to show up and talk about it. So, and I actually hope they can. So, all right. So there's your direction for that. I see the word none after monthly reports, and you've done a spectacular job of monthly reports up until this very busy period. So nobody has anything. My chair's report is equally absent because I do not have one. We have no items to be placed on the consent agenda because these were all approved by ELOC. And I would, unless there's anything else going on, call this meeting adjourned at 8:07 p.m. Thank you very much.